Hello and welcome back to another spoiler episode of Umineko. This video will cover episode 4, parts 6 and 7 of my Let's Play of Umineko. It's going to contain full spoilers. I will talk about the entirety of the thing. I will be discussing details that will not make sense to you if you have not played the whole thing. We begin these sections where Ange has a conversation with a true crime fan and all of the negative associations one might have with that label, who manages to both care more about giving his spiel and just talking on and hearing his own voice, and yet as soon as he happens to think Ange actually has something of value to him, is suddenly extremely desperate and insistent that she fork over any info she might have that he can just gobble up and use to enforce his witch hunting theories. One detail that's a little bit tragic that's buried in here is the way in which Ava managed to precipitate some of the attention that is currently focused on the Ashuramia witch story, because Ava, still in a desperate bind for money, sold off a bunch of assets that just happened to really catch attention of certain enthusiasts who would then tear apart the Rokkenjima story and make it an unending narrative. This is not an unfamiliar concept to people in the modern age, where the internet makes this kind of thing happen all the time. People become the main character of Twitter. People blow up for relatively small things that become big stories. And whether they did something that people find objectionable or agree with or just find contentious in some way, they suddenly find themselves with a lot of attention on them when they wouldn't normally have that much. Obviously, Ava, being a rich person, would have some degree of attention on her, and being the victim of this bizarre crime weekend obviously would have some amount of attention on her. But the part that completely turns Rokkenjima into a bigger myth, one component is her giving them this initial seed, giving them this thing where she doesn't even understand the value of the things she's selling, at least as far as they are concerned, and happens to instigate that they would even begin to look at Rokkenjima as anything of importance and start to spin the narrative that will make Rokkenjima never fade away as a story, as a question, as a mystery. And the thing I find fun about this too is that it needs two components. There needs to be this initial attention on the books being sold off that then gets cemented by the message bottle. Just one is insufficient, because if just the message bottle happened, no one's paying enough attention to find it. If just the books get sold, everyone looks a little bit, but there's nothing to build a narrative out of with the island. The only way for you to even be able to start spinning witch narratives about Rokkenjima, you need some seeding event. Because it is a sealed box, you need some indication of what's inside to then start constructing a diorama of what exactly is inside. And the bottles present two different versions of this in a way that immediately means there is not a singular truth, because there are two conflicting truths that have enough credence that you can't outright deny them, even as both of them clearly demonstrate the other is not true. And by there being two of them, it A, makes it seem less like a bizarre prank, but also invites 3, 4, 5, 6, you can invent new ones. You can reinterpret these as written, because already they're doing that to each other. In the same way that it takes two to create a universe, it takes two message bottles to create the possibility space that there can be more. I'm looking forward to the back half of this game and really getting in deep to all of this meta-narrative stuff, because I'm enjoying it thus far, but we're really only dipping our toes in. One question I have in this section is, why are the message bottles signed by Maria? And I don't think this is necessarily a question that matters a lot, but it's just a curious thought, and I kind of have two interpretations of this. May be an element of Maria's Sorcière where Maria is signing off, although in that case I would imagine Beatrice would also be signing it directly and not just indirectly in that her stamp is on the message bottle. But then the alternative I was wondering is this, as will be promised a couple of videos from now, is this Beatrice effectively presenting a version of revenge to Maria and Maria signing off on, yes, I want this? Because pretty soon we're going to get Maria explicitly requesting revenge on her mother in a way that the first episode sort of delivers, and then the second episode really delivers. Again, a second draft that really drills down on what Maria wanted, to both get revenge on her mother, but also excise the bad witch and prove that her mother did love her more than even some gold or some money. So in that sense, is Maria's signature basically there signing off on, do this spell, perform this magic, this is the world I want? Also, naming your true crime speculation group the Witch Hunt is so on the nose, and yet they don't know. In their process of attempting to hunt fictional witches, they've turned Ava herself into a witch, and they hunt her, despite, as you think about the original incarnation of the idea of a witch hunt, it is a false hunt. It is making up a target that does not actually represent things. It's similar to how Maria talked about the scapegoat witch, of having one person in the class who gets to be a scapegoat so that everyone else can be happy. You make a witch hunt when you don't want to deal with real problems and want to instead fixate on a person who can fakely embody those problems. Ava is not the cause of the Rakanjima incident, but it's certainly convenient for a lot of the general public to think of her in that way. And so maybe the witch hunt people could have thought of a better name and maybe not made the world fixate on this family's tragedy. Also, I do have to reiterate at the end of this conversation how much this professor sucks. He became a witch hunter because he had a daydream in his childhood that he could be the bully. He could take on all the big bullies if he was powerful instead. And also his offhand line, "Oh, my pet theory from my few experiences with women is that they are all witches." Yeah, he just sucks. Which means I do love Ange basically getting to show him something that will completely upend any witch narrative they might have, and then just going, okay, thank you, bye. Then we have a whole section of Ange practicing magic, a talent she has left to atrophy for a long time. But specifically, I wanted to call out that I enjoy Ange specifically being paired with greed, because there's an early section where Mammon / greed, I suppose. There's an early section where Maria says greed is the sin interpretation, but greed could also be desire, ambition, striving for things. Like, there is a positive way to read greed, which fits with the way in which symbols and things like this in general get read. It's not that something has an intrinsic morally good or bad value, it's more about reading it within the context of a wider thing. But also specifically with Ange, greed is a thing she lacks and should have. Ange doesn't have a lot of desires. Ange is pretty detached from life. She's somewhat checked out. She's not really investing in trying to get or do anything besides a sort of general, I want to figure out the mystery because I would like my family back. But she has checked out of any other kind of wants. In a way where Mammon couldn't help but want for various things and reach for them and go for them, Ange is just sort of uninterested in various things that she could theoretically want, but it has no real drive for. So Mammon functions as a good counterpoint of someone who can contrast against Ange for this, and to an extent push Ange, because then it is Mammon who says, unlike Maria, who wants Ange to take it slow and be careful, Mammon's like, summon all of us. I want all the sisters. Bring everybody back. Even if it's beyond your power, you can still just do it. Then in another section, we return to the real world as Ange shows Mammon what it's like living in St. Lucia's and how much it sucks. But in particular, one thing that is funny is the way in which the school is structured to punish people for breaking the rules with a thing they call collective responsibility. Specifically, if an individual does something wrong, like in this case is late, the floor mates as a whole have a punishment of volunteer work that they call collective responsibility. Now, it doesn't take much thought to know the way in which this functions as a punishment for the individual, where the group as a whole is now mad at the one individual who managed to actually break a rule and get all of them punished. This is a strange way of the school, in a roundabout way, getting the children to punish their floor mate. And depending on how cynical you want to be, the school may not be that maliciously inciting bullying, but the only reason to do this is if the guilt and collective punishment is meant to motivate the individual student. And that's still shitty manipulation and bad, even before you get to the part where kids are going to be shitty and kids are only going to think about why did you do the thing that then caused us to be punished. And it's an interesting extension of Maria's theory of witches, where again, there is supposed to be a sacrificial individual, and this is a situation in which the school is almost setting that up. But in a way, the school is being shitty to all these kids, but they can instead use their power not to fight the school, because they just don't have the capacity to do so, but to take out their frustrations on a person they perceive as the cause of their issues. They can't really do anything about the school deciding that they all need to take collective responsibility, but they can certainly take it out on the one person who is on their level who meant that they all had to go and do this. Then there's a moment where Ange talks to Mammon about what Ange ultimately wants, which is to resurrect her family, and the high bar that this requests, and the odds not being very high that you will actually be able to do it. One thing that reading this made me wonder about is, if she has these hair ties from her older brother that have a significant emotional, magical significance, they function as a vessel to summon him. And the reason that is because she has strong memories she can use to summon him. Maria's whole thing about being the Witch of Origins and summoning from zero, that's because Sakutaro is not a person that did exist that Maria summoned her version of. Maria made an entire imaginary friend. Battler is a real person that Ange has some limited memories of, but memories she could draw on to resurrect him, to bring him back. And you need memories for this not to be a very flat conception of this person. If you think about the ways people imagine Kinzo, Kinzo is often very one note in his scenes because a lot of people kind of project a very one-dimensional Kinzo where he has one mode of operating and he is that person. He is always shouting, or he is a quiet, dignified old man, or he's a sad man who never got to meet the love of his life again. In all these cases, a lot of these people don't have that deep a connection to Kinzo, for the most part, to be able to have more nuanced understandings of him. That's what Maria's diary functions as for Ange. The reason Ange can so easily summon Maria is because Maria has put, as she said, a small part of herself into her diary. She has so many memories, thoughts, feelings, and experiences, a range of them for Ange to read through and draw on. She gets a good understanding of Maria holistically, and so it is relatively easy to bring Maria out of that. Battler, as far as we know anyway, did not have a diary that Ange has access to read and learn more about him. What she does have is a gift she gave him that was particularly meaningful to her, that really cemented her understanding of him as a person that she cares about. And she apparently doesn't have this for either of her parents. There's definitely been references before to her parents getting good gifts for her, like her mother in particular knowing what to give her. She has memories of her dad taking time off work to come be at her birthday. It's not that she doesn't have positive memories of them, but she tells the story of Battler winning her these hair charms that she continues to wear to this day, and it's such a clearly crystallized moment and cements her idea that she wants to be a happy family that includes Battler, that is enough of an emotional anchor that she could draw Battler out of that. And I think by extension, the implication being that her whole family could be there. But evidently, neither of her parents gave her something that hit on such an emotional level. Given what we know of her parents from other parts of the game context, a part of me does have to wonder if some of that is her parents being good parents on the level of just being nice and giving good gifts and giving her a happy birthday, but maybe not connecting to her the same way her older brother, who was very absentee, managed to do. A lot of Ange's stuff I'm curious about getting a closer read on this time around, and I think in particular we know so little about her parents, they get not a lot of screen time at all, that I'll look forward to more points that can really fill in her dynamic with them, because she seems to miss them. It's not a case of her saying that she never cared for her parents and she misses her brother only, but she at the same time does not have anything to use to summon them. And lastly, we get a helpful conversation from Lambda Delta, where she gets into all of the trickery and the little white lies and lies of omission that Bernkastel used to make Ange believe even more in the miracle that truly doesn't apply to actual Ange. But the part in particular that I think is interesting and a little bit new here is we've already had a lot of fractured timelines happening in this episode and overlapping in funny ways, because we have Ange of the future, who is on the meta level of the game board, reminiscing about Ange at school age, who is reading Maria's diary of Maria as a child, and at the same time we're also seeing Ange of the future investigating the Rokkenjima incident, and these are two distinct Anges. As I said before, there was a moment on top of the roof with Bernkastel where Ange took a step forward, or a leap forward, and there are two ways that could have gone, and it does feel like one of them led to her investigating Rokkenjima, and one of them took her to the game board. And in particular, Umineko is interested in that fracturing of identity and personhood, because those are two different Anges. There's not a continuity of singular Ange that is experiencing both of these in parallel, although that could exist and maybe something will claim this at some point, but I don't think that's how it actually shakes out. And this is the moment of one Ange realizing she's effectively doomed. She does not have an end point where she gets to be the Ange who gets reunited with her family. Even if she is successful in getting that outcome to occur, which is actually not possible, that is literally not going to happen, she herself will never get to experience that. She simply does not get to be. She simply is now only a piece on the meta level of the game board, but still a level below Bernd Castell and Lambda Delta. She is furniture. She is a tool. What's interesting is that this contrasts with the ways the Stakes of Purgatory have talked before, and the ways that Shannon and Canon belie some knowledge of multiple timelines. In a way, Ange does not have access to that broader awareness, even though other kinds of furniture do have that awareness, and I'm not that interested in trying to make the cosmology of all this make coherent rules-based sense, but in this moment it feels like an interesting point about the ways in which Ange has become fractured by these decisions that split where she goes and what she does, in a way that the furniture is often just a coherent character because they don't have life-splitting decisions in this way. They have more of a continuity of Mammon is Mammon. Mammon is Mammon in all times. She has memories of things that have passed. She has memories of things of the future. And the meta level, in some sense, does exist outside of time, as there is a loop going on. But even with that kind of outside time existence, this Ange has a singular linear experience of time, and her endpoint is not a great one, and is certainly not going to be the endpoint she would hope for. And part of what makes this complex fracturing interesting is that Lambda Delta wants to play Ange against her own interests by pointing out that this Ange will never get the fruit of her labor if she helps Battler win. So instead, this Ange could stay with Battler eternally if they remained trapped in this game, which is of course what Lambda Delta would do, because that's what Lambda Delta is doing to Bernd Castell right now. Lambda Delta would want to trap a person she cares about to stay with them, while Ange would ultimately rather rescue her brother, even if she herself does not get the benefits of that. I remember how this ends. I don't, strictly speaking, remember the through line that leads to Ange making her decision, so that's a part I'm curious to see and read through and have that with a better understanding of where Ange's headspace is, especially that Ange in particular. And especially because I distinctly remember there is going to be a scene, and I don't think it's this episode, but there is going to be a scene of an Ange who meets Featherine, who's like, wait, this didn't happen. So the Ange fracturing is not ending with this episode, that's for sure. And that is going to do it for this video. It's a little bit of a short one, but I want to split it this way because next we will have 2 back-to-back videos of utter tragedy for children, and I think those need to be talked about as a whole. But until then, thank you for watching and see you in the next video.